In the darkest corner of the galaxy, where even starlight fears to venture, Queen Zephyria of the Vorthak Empire held court over 1,000 conquered worlds. Her crystalline throne room echoed with the screams of defeated species, each one begging for mercy that never came. For 3 millennia, no force in the universe had dared challenge her iron grip on the Outer Rim territories. But today was different. Today, a small blue planet called Earth had sent a single representative to her court. Not an army, not a fleet, just one human. As Queen Zephyria's 6 eyes focused on the insignificant creature standing before her massive form, her mandibles clicked in what could only be described as amusement. This tiny, pink-skinned biped thought it could negotiate with the Butcher of Andromeda, the same queen who had personally executed the last Titan of Proxima with her bare claws. Her laughter shook the very foundations of the palace, a sound that had preceded the extinction of 17 different species. But as her mirth echoed through the chamber, she failed to notice something crucial about this human warrior standing calmly before her throne. The human wasn't afraid, and that would prove to be Queen Zephyria's greatest mistake. The massive doors of Queen Zephyria's throne room groaned open with the weight of 10,000 pounds of reinforced titanium carbide alloy. Each door stood 50 feet tall and bore the carved faces of conquered alien races, their expressions frozen in eternal agony. The sound echoed through the cavernous chamber like the final breath of dying gods. Commander Sarah Chun stepped through the threshold with measured steps, her military boots clicking against the polished obsidian floor. Behind her, the doors sealed shut with a finality that had marked the last moments of countless ambassadors, generals, and would-be conquerors. The chamber plunged into an eerie twilight, illuminated only by the pulsing veins of bioluminescent fungus that crawled along the walls like infected arteries. At the far end of the hall, easily 200 meters away, Queen Zephyria lounged upon her throne of fused alien bones. Her massive form dwarfed everything around her, standing nearly 15 feet tall, even while seated. Her exoskeleton gleamed like polished black steel, and her 6 compound eyes tracked Sarah's approach with the patience of a predator watching wounded prey stumble into its web. For arms ended in razor-sharp claws that could slice through starship hull plating, while her powerful legs could crush a grown man's skull like an overripe fruit. Sarah had studied the files. She knew what Queen Zephyria was capable of, had read the reports from the few survivors of her conquests. The Queen of the Vorthak Empire wasn't just a military commander or political leader. She was a force of nature, a living weapon that had personally ended more lives than some galactic plagues. 3,000 years of conquest had built her empire from a single dying world to over 1,000 thriving colonies, each one claimed through violence and maintained through fear. The queen's mandibles clicked rhythmically as Sarah approached, a sound like breaking bones that served as the Vorthak equivalent of laughter. Scattered around the base of her throne were the remnants of previous diplomatic missions, a Centaurian ambassador's crystalline communication device, still flickering weakly with unanswered messages from home. The ceremonial sword of a Rigelian general, its edge dulled from feudal resistance. Fragments of what might once have been a translation device from the peaceful Altarians, now just twisted metal and sparking circuits. Sarah continued walking, her pace steady and unhurried. She wore no ceremonial dress or diplomatic finery, just the standard combat fatigues of the Earth Defense Force. Her sidearm remained holstered at her hip, a gesture that might seem foolish to any observer, but sent its own message. She wasn't here to beg, to negotiate from a position of weakness, or to offer tribute like so many others before her. Halfway across the chamber, Queen Zephyria's clicking grew louder, more excited. Her massive head tilted to one side, studying this strange new specimen with obvious amusement. When the queen finally spoke, her voice resonated through the chamber like grinding tectonic plates, each word carefully pronounced in heavily accented but fluent English. So, the queen rumbled, the primitive mammals of Earth finally. Send someone to discuss terms of surrender. How delightfully pragmatic of your species. She leaned forward slightly, her weight causing the bone throne to creak ominously. Tell me, little human, did your leaders explain to you what happens to those who waste my time with meaningless posturing? Sarah stopped precisely 10 meters from the throne, close enough to speak without shouting, but far enough to demonstrate respect for royal protocol. She didn't bow, didn't avert her gaze, didn't show any of the submission that Queen Zephyria expected from conquered species. Instead, she stood at attention with the bearing of a professional soldier and spoke in a clear, steady voice. Your Majesty, I am Commander Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force, representing the United Nations of Earth. I come bearing a message from humanity regarding your recent ultimatum. Queen Zephyria's 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a display of surprise that rippled across her alien features. You speak to me as though we are equals, little mammal. As though your pathetic world has any choice in this matter. Her claws scraped against the arm of her throne, leaving deep gouges in the bone. Perhaps you don't understand the situation. Let me enlighten you. The queen rose from her throne with fluid grace that belied her massive size. At her full height, she towered over Sarah like a living mountain of chitin and muscle. When she took a step forward, the impact sent vibrations through the floor that Sarah could feel in her bones. Each of her 4 arms moved independently, gesturing as she spoke, the claws catching and reflecting the dim, fungal light. 3 weeks ago, your planet received my standard terms of surrender. Unconditional capitulation within 30 standard days. Complete dismantling of all military forces. Transfer of all natural resources to the Vorthak Empire. Relocation of your population to designated labor worlds. Queen Zephyria's mandibles spread wide in what passed for a smile among her species. These terms have been accepted by over 1,000 civilizations. Some chose to comply immediately. Others chose to resist first and comply later. A precious few chose to resist to the bitter end. She gestured toward the scattered debris around her throne. As you can see, the outcome is always the same. The only variable is how many of your people die before you accept the inevitable. Sarah maintained her military posture throughout the Queen's speech, her expression never changing. When the alien ruler finished speaking, Sarah nodded once, acknowledging that she had heard and understood. Then, she reached slowly into her jacket pocket, moving deliberately to avoid any appearance of reaching for a weapon. Your Majesty, I have a response from the United Nations Security Council regarding your ultimatum. She produced a small datapad and activated it with her thumb. The device projected a holographic message into the space between them, the blue light casting strange shadows on the chamber walls. Queen Zephyria leaned forward, her compound eyes focusing on the projection with interest. Perhaps the humans were finally showing proper respect for her position. Perhaps they would grovel appropriately before accepting their fate. It would make a refreshing change from the usual defiant speeches and futile threats. The holographic image resolved into the figure of an elderly human male in formal diplomatic attire. Secretary General Morrison of the United Nations began speaking in the same measured tones that had characterized Earth's diplomacy for decades. Your Majesty, Queen Zephyria, the projection said, the United Nations of Earth has carefully considered your terms of surrender. After extensive deliberation, we have reached a unanimous decision regarding your ultimatum. Queen Zephyria's clicking grew quieter, more attentive. Finally, the humans were showing proper respect for their situation. The Secretary General continued in his calm, diplomatic voice. Our response is this: go to hell. The hologram flickered and died, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. For several long seconds, Queen Zephyria stared at the empty space where the message had been, her alien mind processing what she had just heard. Then, slowly, her mandibles began to click again. The sound started as barely audible taps, but grew louder and more rapid until it filled the entire chamber with its staccato rhythm. Sarah put the datapad back in her pocket and returned to her position of attention, waiting calmly for the Queen's response. She had delivered her message exactly as instructed and now awaited the inevitable consequences. Queen Zephyria's clicking reached a crescendo that shook dust from the chamber walls, then, suddenly, stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. When the Queen spoke again, her voice carried a dangerous edge that hadn't been there before. Do you understand what you have just done, little human? Do you comprehend the magnitude of your species' stupidity? She took another step closer, her massive form casting Sarah in shadow. I have reduced entire star systems to cosmic dust for less insulting responses than that. I have personally executed the leaders of civilizations that showed me a fraction of the disrespect your planet just demonstrated. Sarah looked up at the towering alien queen without flinching. Your Majesty, I understand the message may not have been what you expected. However, I believe there may have been a misunderstanding about the nature of this meeting. Misunderstanding. Queen Zephyria's voice rose to a roar that rattled the chamber walls. What possible misunderstanding could there be? You are a conquered species that has just committed suicide rather than accept the mercy of servitude. With respect, Your Majesty, we are not a conquered species. Sarah's voice remained perfectly calm, professional, matter of fact. We are a free species that has chosen to remain free. And I'm not here to surrender on behalf of my people. Queen Zephyria's 6 eyes narrowed to deadly slits. Then, why exactly are you here, little mammal? Did your leaders send you to provide me with entertainment before I sterilize your world? Because that is the only possible outcome of this meeting now. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It was not a pleasant smile, not the expression of someone trying to curry favor or beg for mercy. It was the smile of a professional who was finally able to get to work. Your Majesty, I'm not here as a diplomat or an ambassador. I'm here as an advanced scout. My job is to gather intelligence on Vorthack military capabilities, assess the defensive posture of your command ship, and identify high-value targets for elimination. She paused, letting the words sink in. Mission accomplished. The silence that followed was absolute. Queen Zephyria stood frozen, her massive form suddenly, seeming less imposing and more vulnerable. Around the chamber, hidden sensors began detecting energy signatures that had not been there moments before. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with new and dangerous rhythms. You see, Your Majesty, Sarah continued conversationally, humans don't surrender. We don't kneel. We don't beg for mercy. When someone threatens our world, our families, our freedom, we don't send diplomats. She took a step forward, and for the first time in 3 millennia, Queen Zephyria found herself taking an involuntary step backward. We send soldiers. The chamber's emergency lighting suddenly blazed to life, revealing that the bioluminescent fungus on the walls was not fungus at all, but a network of human nanodevices that had been infiltrating the ship systems since Sarah's arrival. Outside the throne room, the sounds of battle began to echo through the corridors as Earth's finest warriors began their assault on the most feared dreadnought in the galaxy. Commander Sarah Chan stood in the strobing light, no longer a lone human facing an impossible enemy, but the tip of the spear of humanity's response to those who would dare threaten Earth. And Queen Zephyria, for the first time in her 3,000-year reign of terror, felt something she had never experienced before: fear. The first explosion rocked the massive dreadnought with enough force to send Queen Zephyria stumbling against her throne. Her compound eyes darted around the chamber as the lights flickered and emergency klaxons began wailing throughout the ship. The sound was deafening, a mechanical scream that signaled mortal danger to the most powerful vessel in the Vorthack fleet. Impossible, she hissed, her mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. My ship is surrounded by a fleet of 300 vessels. No force in the galaxy could penetrate our defenses without being detected. She whirled on Sarah, her 4 arms spread wide in an aggressive posture. What trickery is this, human? Commander Chun checked her wrist chronometer with practice comm. Right on schedule, she murmured, then looked up at the towering alien queen. Your Majesty, you're operating under several false assumptions. First, you assume that because you detected our ship approaching, you detected all of our ships approaching. Second, you assume that the limits of your technology represent the limits of all technology in the galaxy. Another explosion, this one closer to the throne room, sent vibrations through the deck plating strong enough to crack the obsidian floor. Somewhere in the distance, the distinctive whine of human plasma weapons mixed with the deeper boom of Vorthack energy cannons. Queen Zephyrria's security forces were engaging the intruders, but the battle sounds were moving steadily closer rather than fading away. You see, Sarah continued, seemingly oblivious to the chaos erupting around them, humans have a saying: it's better to be underestimated than overestimated. For the past 6 months, while your scouts were observing our primitive technology and our limited military capabilities, we were observing you right back. Queen Zephyria's tactical display materialized in the air before her, a holographic representation of her flagship and the surrounding fleet. What she saw made her blood run cold. Red warning indicators were appearing throughout her vessel, marking hull breaches, system failures, and combat zones. But more disturbing than the damage reports was what the sensors were not showing her. The display showed her 300 escort vessels in perfect formation around the flagship, exactly as they should be. But 12 of those ships were no longer responding to communications, and their energy signatures were slowly fading. As she watched in growing horror, another escort vessel simply vanished from the display, its massive bulk disappearing between one sensor sweep and the next. Our engineers studied every piece of Vorthack technology we could acquire, Sarah explained, her voice cutting through the noise of battle like a knife through silk. Every crash fighter, every disabled probe, every piece of equipment left behind by your advanced scouts. We learned how your sensors work, what frequencies they operate on, what signatures they look for. She smiled that cold, professional smile again. And then we built ships that those sensors cannot detect. The throne room's main entrance exploded inward in a shower of twisted metal and sparks. Through the smoking breach came a squad of 8 humans in powered armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their movements were fluid, coordinated, deadly efficient. They spread out across the chamber with the practiced precision of elite soldiers, their weapons trained on Queen Zephyria while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. Wraith Team, this is Commander Chun. Sarah spoke into her wrist communicator. Target acquired and secured. Begin Phase 2. The lead soldier nodded and spoke in a voice distorted by the armor's vocal modifiers. Understood, Commander. Perimeter established. The Queen is not to leave this chamber alive unless you give the order. Queen Zephyria looked at the armored figures surrounding her and felt something she had not experienced since her youth on the dying world of Vorthack Prime. Uncertainty. These humans moved like apex predators, their every gesture radiating lethal competence. Their weapons, while unfamiliar in design, hummed with barely contained energy that made her exoskeleton tingle with warning signals. You think 8 soldiers can hold me? She snarled, rising to her full height and flexing her razor-sharp claws. I have killed thousands with these hands. I have torn apart battle mechs and crushed starfighters like insects. Your pathetic little warriors are nothing compared to my strength. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed readily. In a fair fight, you would kill all of us without breaking a sweat. Fortunately for humanity, we don't believe in fair fights. The Queen's tactical display updated again, showing a new and terrifying picture. Her escort fleet was melting away like ice in a furnace. Massive dreadnoughts that had conquered star systems were simply ceasing to exist, their destruction so swift and complete that the sensors barely had time to register the energy signatures before they were gone. Your Imperial Majesty, Sarah said formally, allow me to introduce you to humanity's real military technology. The ships your scouts observed were our export models, designed to be captured and studied. What they learned about human capabilities was exactly what we wanted them to learn. Nothing more, nothing less. Through the breach in the throne room wall came the sounds of Vorthack soldiers screaming in their death language, a harsh clicking and chittering that spoke of pain and terror. The distinctive energy signatures of human weapons were growing stronger, moving through the ship like a cancer that consumed everything in its path. Queen Zephyria activated her personal combat systems, feeling the familiar surge of power as her exoskeleton's built-in weapons came online. Energy coursed through her claws, making them glow with superheated plasma that could cut through starship armor. Her compound eyes shifted to combat mode, tracking multiple targets simultaneously while calculating optimal strike patterns. Enough of this, she roared, lunging forward with the speed and power that had made her the most feared warrior in the galaxy. Her first strike was aimed at Sarah's head, a blow that should have decapitated the human female before she could even react. The claw strike never connected. Sarah had already moved, not backward or to the side, but forward and inside the Queen's reach. In one fluid motion, she drew her sidearm and fired 3 precisely aimed shots at the joints of Zephyria's primary striking arm. The weapon's discharge was unlike anything the Queen had ever seen. Instead of the bright energy beams or projectile trail she was familiar with, these shots were barely visible distortions in the air, like heat shimmer or bent light. They struck her armored exoskeleton and simply passed through it as though it were not there, severing the neural connections that controlled her massive arm without even slowing down. Queen Zephyria staggered backward, staring in disbelief at her useless limb. The arm was physically undamaged, but she could no longer feel it or control its movements. Whatever those weapons fired, they targeted nervous systems rather than physical structures. Phase variance neural disruptors, Sarah explained matter-of-factly, keeping her weapon trained on the Queen while the Wraith team maintained their overwatch positions. They're designed specifically for large, heavily armored opponents. The energy passes through physical matter without interaction until it encounters neural tissue. Then, it disrupts the bioelectric signals that control motor functions. The Queen tried to swing with her remaining arms, but Sarah was no longer where she had been. The human woman moved with inhuman speed and precision, always staying just outside the reach of those deadly claws while methodically targeting nerve clusters with surgical precision. Each shot disabled another limb, another weapon system, another piece of the Queen's formidable arsenal. "This is impossible," Zephyria gasped, her massive form swaying as she struggled to remain upright with only one functioning arm. No species develops this level of military technology without conquering other worlds first. You cannot have learned to build such weapons without an empire to support the research. Sarah paused in her assault, tilting her head as though considering the question seriously. Your Majesty, that's a very good point. Most species probably would need to conquer others to develop this kind of technology. She gestured around the throne room, where the sounds of battle were beginning to fade as human forces secured more and more of the ship. But then, most species don't spend their entire evolutionary history trying to kill each other. The Queen's remaining compound eyes widened in comprehension. You developed all of this fighting yourselves? Humans have been perfecting the art of warfare for over 10,000 years, Sarah confirmed. We fought with stones and clubs, swords and shields, gunpowder and steel, aircraft and tanks, nuclear weapons and orbital platforms. We've had world wars that killed millions, civil conflicts that lasted decades, and cold wars that drove technological advancement at a pace that would terrify most civilized species. She fired one more shot, and Queen Zephyria's final functional arm went dead. The massive alien Queen collapsed to her knees, her own weight too much to support without the use of her limbs. For the first time in 3 millennia, she was completely helpless. Every weapon system on this ship, every defensive measure in your fleet, every tactic in your military doctrine, we've already developed countermeasures for all of them, Sarah continued. Because humans have been fighting versions of these battles against each other for longer than your entire civilization has existed. The tactical display showed the final act of the battle. The last of the Vorthack escort vessels were succumbing to the invisible human ships, their massive hulks drifting dark and lifeless in space. The flagship itself was now completely under human control, its crew either dead, captured, or fled in escape pods that were being systematically collected by more human vessels that had somehow materialized out of empty space. But how? Queen Zephyria whispered, her voice barely audible. How did you transport an entire invasion fleet without being detected? How did you infiltrate my ship? How did you know exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage? Sarah holstered her weapon and approached the fallen queen, no longer seeing her as a threat, but as a defeated enemy, deserving of at least minimal respect. Because we've been here for weeks, Your Majesty. Every time your scouts made contact with our outer system patrols, every time your advanced ships conducted reconnaissance missions near Earth space, every time you thought you were observing us, we were actually observing you. She gestured to the nano-device network that was still pulsing along the chamber walls. Those aren't just intelligence-gathering tools. They're infiltration systems that have been mapping every corridor, every system, every weak point on this ship. When your forces visited Earth's solar system to deliver your ultimatum, they brought passengers back with them. Passengers they never knew were there. The Queen tried to speak, but found her voice failing as the neural disruptor's effects spread through her system. Sarah knelt beside the massive alien form, her expression showing neither cruelty nor satisfaction, just professional completion of a mission. Your empire ends today, Your Majesty. Not because humanity is more powerful than the Vorthack, but because humans understand something that you never learned. The most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate. Sarah stood and activated her communicator. All teams, this is Commander Chun. Primary objective achieved. Begin the liberation protocols. As the sounds of human soldiers moving through the ship grew louder, Queen Zephyria realized that she had made a fundamental error in judgment. She had assumed that because humans were younger and less technologically advanced than her species, they would be easier to conquer. She had never considered that a species raised in constant conflict might have developed advantages that peaceful expansion could never provide. The Queen of the Vorthack Empire closed her eyes and waited for the end, finally, understanding why the human had never shown fear. Sarah Chun hadn't been facing a superior enemy. She had been conducting a routine military operation against a target that had already been defeated before the battle even began. The liberation of the Vorthack flagship proceeded with mechanical efficiency. Throughout the massive vessel, human soldiers moved like shadows made manifest, their advanced armor allowing them to phase through walls when necessary and become completely invisible when stealth was required. Queen Zephyria listened to the sounds of her empire crumbling around her, each distant explosion and weapon discharge marking another strategic point falling under human control. Commander Chun stood over the fallen queen, speaking quietly into her wrist communicator as she coordinated the operation. Wraith 7, status on the command deck. Secured, Commander. All bridge personnel neutralized or captured. We have full control of navigation, communications, and weapons systems. Wraith 4, what about engineering? Clean sweep, Commander. Their power core is now under our control. No resistance encountered. They weren't expecting anyone to reach the reactor room through 17 layers of security. Copy that. Wraith 2, prisoner collection status. We've secured approximately 3,000 Vorthack personnel in the cargo bays. Medical teams are treating the wounded, and intelligence specialists are beginning interrogations of command staff. Sarah nodded, satisfied with the progress. Around the throne room, the 8 soldiers of Wraith Team maintained their vigilant watch over Queen Zephyria, their weapons never wavering despite the obvious fact that their target could no longer pose any physical threat. Your Majesty, Sarah said, turning her attention back to the paralyzed alien ruler, I think it's time you understood exactly what has happened here today. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was a comprehensive dismantling of everything your empire represents. Queen Zephyria's compound eyes tracked upward to focus on Sarah's face. The neural disruptors had robbed her of the ability to move, but her mind remained sharp and aware. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, forced through mandibles that could barely function. You have taken my ship, but my empire spans 1,000 worlds. This changes nothing. My admirals will crush your pathetic planet. Sarah shook her head slowly, almost sadly. I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Your Majesty. You see, this operation isn't just about capturing one ship or eliminating one leader. This is about demonstrating to every species in your empire that the Vorthack can be defeated. She gestured to one of the Wraith Team soldiers, who produced a portable holographic projector. The device activated, filling the air above Queen Zephyria with a 3-dimensional display of the local star system. What the display showed would have been impossible for the Queen to believe if she hadn't just experienced it firsthand. The tactical readout revealed the positions of over 50 human vessels, each one significantly larger than the Vorthack flagship that had once been the most powerful ship in this region of space. They hung motionless in the void like sleeping leviathans, their stealth systems disabled now that concealment was no longer necessary. These weren't the primitive spacecraft that Vorthack scouts had reported observing in Earth's solar system. These were warships that defied every assumption about human technological capabilities. The ships your intelligence services detected were decoys, Sarah explained, watching the Queen's expression change as the scope of humanity's deception became clear. Real enough to fool your sensors, but equipped with deliberately inferior technology. We wanted you to think you knew what you were facing. The display zoomed out, revealing more contacts throughout the star system. Vorthack defense stations that should have been impregnable fortresses were dark and silent, their massive weapons platforms now flying human identification codes. Patrol fleets that had guarded critical hyperspace routes were either destroyed or captured. In less than 6 hours, humanity had dismantled military defenses that had taken the Vorthack Empire decades to construct. But this is still only one system, the Queen managed to wheeze. You cannot fight an empire of 1,000 worlds with 50 ships. You're right, Sarah agreed readily. 50 ships couldn't conquer an empire that size. But, fortunately, we don't need to conquer your empire. We just need to liberate it. The holographic display shifted again, this time showing a map of the entire Vorthack Empire. Red indicators marked the locations of major military installations, fleet concentrations, and administrative centers. But, as Sarah watched, those red indicators began changing to blue, one by one, in a cascade that spread across the galactic map like wildfire. What you're seeing is the result of 6 months of preparation, Sarah explained. While your scouts were studying our decoy technology, our real ships were conducting reconnaissance missions throughout your empire. We identified every major military target, every key infrastructure node, every critical communication relay. Queen Zephyria tried to process what she was seeing. The blue indicators were appearing too quickly, too systematically. It wasn't possible for any military force to coordinate attacks across such vast distances simultaneously. The logistics alone should have been impossible. You're watching Operation Prometheus, Sarah continued, named after the human mythological figure who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. At precisely 1,400 hours Earth Standard Time, human forces initiated simultaneous strikes against 374 critical targets throughout your empire. The Queen's mind reeled. Simultaneous attacks across dozens of star systems would require coordination beyond anything she had thought possible. Even with faster-than-light communication, the time delays involved in managing such an operation should have made it logistically impossible. Each strike team was equipped with the same advanced technology you've encountered today, Sarah went on. Phase variance weapons, quantum stealth systems, neural network infiltration protocols. But more importantly, each team was given the same mission parameters: minimize casualties among enslaved populations, preserve infrastructure that could be used for reconstruction, and eliminate only those Vorthack forces that refused to surrender. As the display updated in real time, Queen Zephyria watched her empire die, not through the brutal conquest that had built it, but through surgical precision that dismantled her military forces while leaving everything else intact. Worlds that had been under Vorthack control for centuries were reporting successful liberation. Enslaved species that had served the Empire for generations were announcing their independence. Administrative centers that had governed entire sectors were declaring themselves free territories. The beautiful thing about an empire built on fear, Sarah observed, is that once you remove the source of that fear, the whole structure collapses almost instantly. Your subject species aren't rising up because we conquered them. They're rising up because we showed them that you could be beaten. The throne room's communications system crackled to life, broadcasting a transmission from the human fleet admiral. Commander Chun, this is Admiral Harrison aboard the UES Prometheus. Operation Status Report. Phase 1 objectives achieved across all theaters. Vorthack military resistance has collapsed in 87% of target systems. Phase 2 liberation protocols are proceeding ahead of schedule. Copy that, Admiral. Primary targets secured and awaiting transfer to detention facility. Understood, Commander. Excellent work. Queen Zephyria listened to the exchange with growing comprehension of the scope of her defeat. This hadn't been a desperate last stand by a primitive species facing extinction. This had been a carefully planned and flawlessly executed military operation designed to dismantle her empire in a single coordinated strike. But why? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Why go to such lengths? Why not simply destroy us? Why preserve our worlds, our people? Sarah knelt beside the fallen queen again, her expression showing something that might have been compassion. Because that's not who humans are, Your Majesty. We don't conquer for the sake of conquest, and we don't destroy for the sake of destruction. We fight when we have to, and we win when we fight, but we don't become monsters in the process. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed human vessels providing humanitarian aid to newly liberated worlds. Medical ships were treating injured populations, cargo vessels were delivering food and supplies to worlds that had been strip-mined for resources, and engineering teams were beginning repairs on infrastructure that had been damaged during the liberation. Every world your empire conquered still exists, Sarah explained. Every species you enslaved is now free to determine its own fate. Every resource you hoarded is being distributed to the populations that need it most. Your empire is being replaced, but it's being replaced with something better. The Queen tried to understand this concept, but found it alien to everything she knew about galactic politics. You're giving up everything? The resources, the strategic positions, the tribute from 1,000 worlds? What do you gain from this? We gain the knowledge that we prevented a genocide, Sarah replied simply. You see, Your Majesty, our intelligence services didn't just study your military capabilities. They also studied your long-term plans for humanity. We know about the slave labor quotas you had established for our population. We know about the breeding programs you intended to implement. We know about your plans to use Earth as a testing ground for new biological weapons. The Queen's compound eyes widened slightly. Those classified documents have been stored in the most secure files on the most protected servers in the Empire. Accessing them would have required infiltrating the highest levels of Vorthack command structure. How long? Queen Zephyria asked, her voice filled with dread. How long have you been inside our systems? Sarah smiled that cold, professional smile again. Your Majesty, I think you're still not grasping the scope of this operation. We haven't been inside your systems. We've been inside your empire. For the past 2 years, roughly 15% of your administrative staff, technical personnel, and military officers have been human agents using advanced biological disguises. The revelation hit Queen Zephyria like a physical blow. 2 years of having her most sensitive operations observed and reported on by the very species she had planned to enslave. 2 years of her enemies sitting in her strategy meetings, reading her classified files, learning every detail of her empire's strengths and weaknesses. Every plan you made, every strategy you developed, every target you identified. We knew about it before your own commanders did, Sarah continued. Operation Prometheus wasn't just a military strike, Your Majesty. It was a counterintelligence operation 2 years in the making. The holographic display shifted one final time, showing the current status of the galactic region that had once been the Vorthack Empire. Instead of the centralized militaristic structure that Queen Zephyria had built, the map now showed dozens of independent star systems, each one flying its own flag and making its own decisions about trade, governance, and defense. Within 72 hours, representatives from Earth will be meeting with the newly liberated worlds to establish trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and cultural exchange programs, Sarah explained. But these will be partnerships between equals, not the relationship between conqueror and conquered. Queen Zephyria closed her compound eyes, finally, understanding the magnitude of what had happened. Her 3,000-year empire had been destroyed not by superior force, but by superior intelligence, superior planning, and a species that fought with a level of coordination and strategic thinking that she had never encountered before. When she opened her eyes again, Sarah was standing over her with an expression that might have been pity. Your Majesty, you made one fundamental error in your assessment of humanity. You assumed that because we had never built an interstellar empire, we didn't know how to fight an interstellar war. You never considered the possibility that we might have chosen not to build an empire for moral reasons rather than practical limitations. The sounds of battle had completely faded now, replaced by the efficient bustle of human personnel securing the vessel and preparing it for transport. Queen Zephyria realized that she was probably the last Vorthack military commander still conscious on her own flagship. What happens to me now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah checked her chronometer again. In approximately 30 minutes, you'll be transferred to a detention facility aboard one of our prison ships. You'll stand trial for crimes against sapient species, genocide, and violations of interstellar law. Given the scope of your crimes, the sentence will likely be life imprisonment. And my people, those who surrender will be treated according to the Geneva Conventions and their species-specific adaptations. Those who committed war crimes will stand trial. Those who were just following orders will be processed and released. Your species as a whole will be free to establish a new government and find its place in the galactic community as equals rather than conquerors. Queen Zephyria lay still for a long moment, contemplating the end of everything she had built. Finally, she spoke one last time, her voice filled with something that might have been respect. I underestimated you. Yes, Sarah agreed simply. You did. 6 weeks after the collapse of the Vorthak Empire, Commander Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of the newly established Galactic Liberation Command Center, a massive space station constructed from the repurposed hull of Queen Zephyria's former flagship. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum windows, she could see a sight that would have been impossible to imagine just 2 months earlier. Hundreds of ships from dozens of different species, all working together in a massive relief and reconstruction effort. The irony wasn't lost on her that the most feared vessel in the galaxy had been transformed into a symbol of hope and cooperation. Where once the ship had carried instruments of conquest and oppression, it now housed medical facilities, refugee processing centers, and diplomatic meeting rooms where former slave species were learning to govern themselves as free peoples. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the chief xenobiologist for the liberation effort, approached with a data tablet in her hand and an expression of barely contained excitement on her face. Sarah, you need to see these latest reports from the reconstruction teams. The results are even better than we projected. Sarah accepted the tablet and scrolled through the data, her eyebrows rising as she absorbed the information. After 6 weeks of intensive humanitarian efforts, the statistics painted a remarkable picture of recovery and renewal. Over 800 formerly enslaved worlds had established provisional governments. Refugee populations that had been displaced for decades were being resettled on their ancestral homeworlds. Industrial facilities that had been used for weapons production were being converted to manufacture medical equipment, agricultural technology, and infrastructure components. The Altarian healing centers are operating at full capacity, Elena continued, her voice animated with professional enthusiasm. Their medical technology, combined with resources that were previously hoarded by the Vorthak, is allowing us to treat injuries and illnesses that have plagued these populations for generations. We've already cured 3 different plague variants that the Empire had been using as biological weapons. Sarah nodded, though her expression remained thoughtful. What about the Vorthak themselves? How are they adapting to their new situation? Elena's expression sobered slightly. That's more complicated. About 60% of the civilian population has accepted the change and is cooperating with reconstruction efforts. The younger generations especially seem relieved that they're no longer expected to participate in conquest campaigns. But there's still significant resistance from military hardliners and some of the older administrative castes. Through the window, Sarah could see one of the most encouraging sights of the reconstruction effort. A joint engineering team comprised of humans, Altarians, and even some cooperative Vorthak working together to construct a new communications relay. The species that had been mortal enemies just weeks ago were now sharing technical knowledge and coordinating their efforts with remarkable efficiency. The psychological adjustment is going to take time, Sarah acknowledged. 3,000 years of imperial conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. But the important thing is that they're not being forced to participate in atrocities anymore. A soft chime from the station's communication system interrupted their conversation. Commander Chun, please report to Conference Room Alpha. Priority diplomatic meeting in progress. Sarah handed the tablet back to Elena and made her way through the station's corridors, passing dozens of busy personnel from more species than she could easily count. The sight still amazed her. Beings that had been afraid to even speak their own names under Vorthak rule were now walking freely, working collaboratively, and planning their own futures. Conference Room Alpha had once been Queen Zephyria's private war room, where the alien ruler had planned conquest campaigns and reviewed casualty reports with cold efficiency. Now it served as the primary diplomatic chamber for the Galactic Liberation Council, a body comprised of representatives from every liberated world. As Sarah entered the room, she found herself facing a scene that would have been unthinkable under the old regime. Around the massive conference table sat beings from dozens of different species, all engaged in animated but respectful debate about resource allocation, trade agreements, and mutual defense protocols. At the head of the table, serving as chairman for this session, was former General Kithara of the Centaurian Defense Forces, a species that had been one of the first to fall to Vorthack expansion, but had never stopped fighting underground resistance campaigns. "Ah, Commander Chen," General Kithara said, his crystalline features brightening as he noticed her arrival. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing the proposal from the Regelian delegation regarding territorial boundaries in the former Outer Rim territories." Sarah took her seat at the table, noting how different this gathering was from the typical human military briefings she was accustomed to. Instead of a rigid command structure with clear hierarchies, this was a genuine collaborative effort where every voice carried equal weight regardless of the speaker's species or the size of their homeworld. Ambassador Tlara of the Vegan Confederacy, whose people had been enslaved for over 800 years, leaned forward in her chair. "Commander Chun, we wanted to thank you personally for the medical supplies that arrived yesterday. Our healers estimate that the new pharmaceutical compounds will reduce childhood mortality on our worlds by over 70% within the next year." "The thanks aren't necessary, Ambassador," Sarah replied. "Those supplies aren't charity. They're part of the resource redistribution protocols. Those compounds were being hoarded by the Vorthack military for their exclusive use. Now they're available to everyone who needs them." Admiral Zorix of the Andromedan Militia, whose species had lost 3 entire worlds to Vorthack biological weapons, spoke up from across the table. "Commander, there is one matter that many of us have been discussing privately. We understand that humanity played the primary role in our liberation, and we are eternally grateful for that. But we're concerned about what comes next." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What kind of concerns?" "The concern," General Kithara said carefully, "is that humanity now possesses military capabilities that far exceed anything the rest of us can field. While we trust your species' intentions completely, history teaches us that power concentrated in the hands of any single group can eventually lead to problems." The room fell silent as the assembled representatives waited for Sarah's response. It was a legitimate concern, and one that human leadership had anticipated and planned for. The species around this table had spent generations living under the rule of a technologically superior military force, and they had every reason to be wary of finding themselves in a similar situation, even with allies they trusted. "You're absolutely right to be concerned about that," Sarah said finally. "A military imbalance like that would be dangerous for everyone, including humanity, which is why we've already begun implementing protocols to address the issue." She activated the room's holographic display, showing a detailed technical schematic of human military technology. The assembled delegates leaned forward with interest, many of them recognizing systems that have been used to liberate their worlds. "Effective immediately, all human military technology is being shared with the Galactic Liberation Council," Sarah announced. "The manufacturing specifications, the theoretical principles, the training protocols, everything. Within 2 years, every species represented in this room will have the ability to construct vessels and weapons equivalent to anything in the human arsenal." The revelation caused a stir of excited conversation around the table. Ambassador Tlara was the first to voice what many were thinking. "But, Commander, won't that eliminate humanity's military advantage? What if one of our species decides to use this technology aggressively?" Sarah smiled, and for the first time since the liberation began, it wasn't the cold, professional expression she wore in combat situations. This was the genuine smile of someone who was proud of her species' choices. "Ambassador, if any species tries to use this technology to build a new empire, they'll find themselves facing the combined military might of everyone else at this table. The point isn't to maintain humanity's advantage. The point is to ensure that no one ever again has the kind of overwhelming advantage that the Vorthack possessed." Admiral Zorix studied the technical schematics with obvious fascination. "This level of technology sharing is unprecedented in galactic history. Most species guard their military secrets jealously. Most species also spend their time fighting each other instead of working together," Sarah pointed out. "Humans learned a long time ago that our greatest achievements come from collaboration, not domination. We didn't develop this technology to conquer other species. We developed it to protect ourselves and others from conquest." General Kithara activated his own datapad and began making notes. The implications of this are staggering. With access to phase variance weapons and quantum stealth systems, even the smallest worlds will be able to defend themselves against potential aggressors. The balance of power in the galaxy will be fundamentally altered. That's exactly the idea, Sarah confirmed. We want to create a situation where conquest becomes impossible, not just impractical. When every species has access to equivalent defensive technology, the only way to gain resources or territory is through trade and negotiation. The discussion continued for several hours as the assembled delegates worked through the practical details of technology transfer, training programs, and manufacturing protocols. Sarah found herself impressed by the level of cooperation and forward-thinking displayed by beings who had been living under oppression just weeks earlier. The transition from subjects to citizens was happening faster than anyone had dared to hope. As the meeting concluded and the delegates began to file out, Ambassador Clara approached Sarah with a question that had obviously been weighing on her mind. "Commander, may I ask you something personal? When you first entered Queen Zephyria's throne room, you seemed completely calm, as if you weren't facing mortal danger at all. How did you manage that?" Sarah considered the question for a moment before answering. "I wasn't calm because I wasn't afraid, Ambassador. I was calm because I knew exactly what was going to happen. Every detail of that mission had been planned and rehearsed hundreds of times. By the time I walked into that throne room, Queen Zephyria had already lost. She just didn't know it yet. But what if something had gone wrong? What if the plan had failed? Then I would have died," Sarah said simply. "But the mission would have continued without me. One of the advantages of working with humans is that we plan for contingencies. If I had been killed, 3 backup teams were standing by to complete the operation. If they had failed, orbital bombardment platforms were prepared to eliminate the entire Vorthack fleet. If that hadn't worked, our home fleet had orders to implement a full-scale invasion." Ambassador Clara's expression showed a mixture of admiration and concern. "You plan to sacrifice yourself, if necessary?" "If necessary, yes. That's what soldiers do, Ambassador. We accept risks so that civilians don't have to. But, more importantly, we plan thoroughly enough that sacrifice usually isn't necessary." Sarah gestured toward the window, where the reconstruction effort continued around the clock. "Every person working on this station, every ship in this fleet, every world that's been liberated, they're all here because a lot of people were willing to risk everything to make freedom possible." As the ambassador left to rejoin her delegation, Sarah remained in the conference room for a few more minutes, reviewing the day's accomplishments and planning for tomorrow's challenges. The liberation of the Vorthack Empire had been the easy part, she reflected. The real work, helping dozens of species learn to govern themselves, establishing new trade relationships, preventing conflicts between former enemies, was just beginning. Through the window, she could see a sight that filled her with cautious optimism. A mixed crew of humans, Altarians, and Vorthack working together to install medical equipment on a hospital ship bound for one of the Outer Rim worlds. They moved with the easy cooperation of people who had learned to see past species differences and focus on shared goals. It would take years, maybe decades, to fully heal the wounds left by 3 millennia of oppression. There would be setbacks, conflicts, and challenges that no one could currently anticipate. But for the first time in galactic history, those challenges would be faced by free peoples working together as equals. And that, Sarah reflected, was worth everything they had risked to achieve. 1 year after the fall of the Vorthack Empire, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. What had once been a region of space dominated by fear and oppression had become a thriving network of independent worlds connected by trade, mutual defense agreements, and cultural exchange programs. The speed of the transformation had surprised even the most optimistic projections from human strategic planners. Sarah Chun stood in the memorial garden that had been constructed in the center of the former Queen's flagship, now permanently converted into the Galactic Liberation Memorial Station. The garden was a living tribute to all those who had died under Vorthack rule, with plants and monuments contributed by every liberated species. Crystalline trees from Centauri Prime grew alongside flowering vines from the Altarian homeworld, while memorial stones carved with the names of the fallen were arranged in patterns that reflected the astronomical traditions of their respective cultures. At the center of the garden stood a simple plaque made from metal salvaged from Queen Zephyria's throne. The inscription, written in over 30 different languages, read, "In memory of those who died in darkness, and in honor of those who brought them light. May freedom ring eternal among the stars." "Quite a change from a year ago," said a familiar voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Dr. Elena Vasquez approaching along the garden path, her arms filled with reports and data tablets as always. After the liberation, Elena had been appointed as the first director of interspecies medical cooperation, a position that kept her traveling constantly between worlds as she coordinated healthcare initiatives across the former empire. "The medical statistics still amaze me," Elena continued, settling down on a bench near the memorial plaque. "Infant mortality rates down by an average of 80% across all liberated worlds. Life expectancy up by 15 to 20 years for most species. We've virtually eliminated 7 different diseases that the Vorthack were using as biological control mechanisms." Sarah joined her on the bench, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of the garden. It was hard to believe that this serene space had once been part of the most feared warship in the galaxy. "What about the psychological recovery? That was always going to be the biggest challenge." "Better than we hoped, actually," Elena replied, consulting one of her tablets. "The younger generations are adapting remarkably well to freedom. They're enthusiastic about education, eager to learn about their own cultures and histories that were suppressed under Vorthack rule. It's the older populations that are struggling more with the transition." Through the garden's transparent walls, they could see the constant traffic of ships arriving and departing from the station. Merchant vessels loaded with goods from dozens of worlds, passenger transports carrying families reunited after decades of separation, scientific research ships crewed by mixed-species teams working on collaborative projects. The former symbol of tyranny had become a hub of peaceful activity. "Any news from a Vorthack rehabilitation colonies?" Sarah asked. Elena's expression grew more serious. "Mixed results there. About 70% of the civilian population has successfully integrated into the new galactic community. They're contributing to reconstruction efforts, learning new skills, even forming friendships with members of species they were taught to consider inferior. But the remaining 30%, especially former military personnel, are having severe difficulty adapting. It had been decided early in the reconstruction process that simply imprisoning the entire Vorthack military would create more problems than it solved. Instead, a system of rehabilitation colonies had been established where former Imperial personnel could undergo psychological counseling, education about other species, and training for peaceful occupations. The results have been encouraging, but far from universal. "What about Queen Zephyria herself?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Still refusing all attempts at rehabilitation," Elena confirmed. "She spends most of her time in solitary meditation, apparently trying to understand how her empire could have been defeated so completely. The psychological team assigned to her case thinks she's having difficulty accepting that her fundamental worldview was incorrect." A soft chime from the station's communication system interrupted their conversation. "Commander Chun, please report to the main conference room. Priority transmission from Earth." Sarah sighed and stood up from the bench. Even a year later, Earth's political leadership still wanted regular briefings on galactic affairs, though their involvement had decreased significantly as the new interspecies government found its footing. "Duty calls," she said to Elena. "Will you be staying on the station long?" "Just until tomorrow. Then I'm heading to the Regellian system to help set up their new pediatric research facility. Apparently, they've developed some promising treatments for genetic disorders that were caused by Vorthack biological experiments." As Sarah made her way through the station's corridors, she reflected on how dramatically her own role had evolved over the past year. What had begun as a military operation had transformed into something more like diplomatic coordination and cultural mediation. Instead of planning battles, she now spent most of her time helping resolve trade disputes, mediating territorial agreements, and facilitating scientific cooperation between species that were still learning to trust each other. The main conference room had been completely redesigned since its days as Queen Zephyria's war room. The imposing tactical displays and weapon control systems had been replaced with comfortable seating arrangements and communication equipment designed to accommodate the physical needs of multiple species. Today, the room hosted representatives from Earth's United Nations, the Galactic Liberation Council, and several individual world governments. Secretary General Morrison appeared on the main holographic display, his elderly features showing the strain of managing Earth's new role in galactic affairs. Behind him, Sarah could see the familiar view of Earth's blue oceans and white clouds through the windows of the orbital command station. Commander Chun, the Secretary General began, I'm pleased to report that the United Nations General Assembly has voted unanimously to accept the Galactic Liberation Council's proposal for permanent membership in the Interspecies Cooperation Treaty. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction at the news. The treaty represented the formalization of everything they had been working towards since the liberation began, a binding agreement between all member species to resolve conflicts through negotiation, share technological and medical advances freely, and provide mutual assistance in times of crisis. That's excellent news, Mr. Secretary General, Sarah replied. What about the concerns that were raised regarding Earth's military capabilities? Addressed through the technology sharing protocols you recommended, Morrison confirmed. All signatory species now have access to the same defensive technologies, which has effectively eliminated the military imbalance that concerned some delegates. The treaty also includes binding restrictions on the development of new weapons systems. Any advances must be shared immediately with all members. The implications were staggering. For the first time in galactic history, an agreement existed that made large-scale warfare virtually impossible. With every species having access to equivalent defensive technology, and with binding commitments to peaceful conflict resolution, the conditions that had allowed empires like the Vorthack to arise could never be repeated. There is one additional matter, Morrison continued, his tone becoming more formal. The Council has requested that you consider accepting the position of First Director General of Interspecies Security. The role would involve coordinating the new joint defense forces and ensuring compliance with the military restrictions in the treaty. Sarah had been expecting this offer for weeks, though she hadn't decided how to respond. The position would represent the culmination of everything she had worked for since the liberation began, but it would also mean spending the rest of her career managing galactic politics rather than returning to the more straightforward world of military service. I'm honored by the offer, Mr. Secretary General, but I'd like to request some time to consider it. This isn't a decision I want to make hastily. Of course, Commander. The Council understands the magnitude of what they're asking. Take all the time you need. As the transmission ended, Sarah found herself alone in the conference room with her thoughts. Through the windows, she could see the garden where she had been sitting with Elena just an hour earlier. The memorial plaque was barely visible from this angle, but she knew it was there, a permanent reminder of why all of this work mattered. A soft knock at the door interrupted her contemplation. Come in, she called, expecting to see one of the station's administrative staff. Instead, the door opened to reveal a figure she hadn't seen in months. Former Queen Zephyria, flanked by 2 human guards but apparently free to move about the station. The alien ruler looked dramatically different from the imposing figure who had once terrorized 1,000 worlds. Her exoskeleton had lost its lustrous sheen, her compound eyes seemed dimmer, and her massive frame appeared somehow diminished. Your Majesty, Sarah said, rising from her chair out of basic courtesy. This is unexpected. I was told you had refused all social contact. I have, Zephyria replied, her voice much quieter than Sarah remembered. But there is something I need to understand before I can continue my reflection. May I ask you a question, Commander Chen? Sarah gestured to one of the chairs that had been modified to accommodate Vorthack physiology. Please sit. What would you like to know? The former queen settled into the chair with obvious discomfort, her forearms folding awkwardly as she tried to find a position that didn't make her feel vulnerable. I've spent this past year trying to understand how my empire could have been defeated so completely, so quickly. I have analyzed every tactical decision, every strategic choice, every intelligence failure. But there is one aspect of your victory that I cannot comprehend. Which aspect is that? Why did you stop? Zephyria asked, her compound eyes focusing intently on Sarah's face. You had the military capability to conquer my entire empire, to enslave my people as we had enslaved others, to claim all of our resources and territory for yourselves. Instead, you freed everyone and gave away your technological advantages. Why? Sarah considered the question for a long moment. It was the same question that had been asked by dozens of species over the past year, and her answer had evolved as she gained better insight into what drove human behavior. Your Majesty, do you know what the word victory means to humans? Zephyria's mandibles clicked uncertainly. Defeating one's enemies? Claiming their territory? Enslaving their populations? Those are conquest, not victory, Sarah corrected gently. For humans, victory means creating a situation where the conflict can never happen again. We didn't want to rule your empire. We wanted to make it impossible for any empire like yours to exist in the future. The former queen's expression showed confusion. But ruling would have been simpler. Maintaining control through superior force requires fewer resources than this. She gestured toward the window, where the peaceful activity of the station continued. Simpler in the short term, perhaps. But humans think in terms of centuries, not decades. An empire built on force requires constant application of that force to maintain itself. Eventually, the subjects either revolt or the rulers exhaust themselves trying to maintain control. Either way, the system collapses, and we're back where we started. Sarah moved to the window and looked out at the ships passing by. What we've built here is sustainable because it's based on mutual benefit rather than domination. Every species has a stake in maintaining the system because every species benefits from it. But what if one of the liberated species decides to become aggressive? What if they use the technology you gave them to attack others? Then, they'll face the combined response of everyone else, Sarah replied simply. That's the beauty of this system. It's self-correcting. Any species that tries to become a new Vorthak empire will find themselves fighting the entire galaxy. Queen Zephyria sat in silence for several minutes, processing this explanation. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a note of something that might have been regret. I have ruled through fear for 3,000 years. I believe that power came from the ability to destroy, and that respect came from being feared above all else. But in 1 year, you have achieved something I never could, genuine loyalty from those you protect. Fear is temporary, Sarah agreed. It only lasts as long as the source of fear remains stronger than its subjects. But gratitude, respect, friendship, those bonds grow stronger over time. The former queen rose from her chair, her massive frame still imposing despite her diminished circumstances. Commander Chun, if I may ask one final question, do you believe that someone like me can change? Can 3 millennia of conditioning be overcome? Sarah turned to face the alien ruler directly. Your Majesty, over the past year, I've seen former Vorthak soldiers working alongside species they once oppressed, former slaves learning to govern themselves as free peoples, and enemies becoming allies. If all of that is possible, then yes, I believe anyone can change if they truly want to. As Queen Zephyria left the conference room, escorted by her guards back to her quarters, Sarah reflected on the conversation. The former tyrant's questions had highlighted something important about the transformation that had taken place over the past year. This wasn't just a political or military change. It was a fundamental shift in how entire civilizations thought about power, cooperation, and the nature of strength itself. Her communicator chimed with an incoming message from Earth Command. The text was brief, but significant. Commander Chun, please confirm your decision regarding the Director General position. The Galactic Council convenes in 2 weeks to formalize the new security protocols. Sarah looked out the window one more time, watching ships from dozens of worlds working together in perfect harmony. The memorial plaque in the garden caught the light from a passing transport, its simple message gleaming against the dark metal. She had spent her entire career as a soldier, dedicated to protecting Earth and humanity from threats. Now she had the opportunity to protect not just one world, but all worlds from the kind of tyranny that had once seemed invincible. It wasn't the career path she had planned, but it was exactly what the galaxy needed. Sarah activated her communicator and composed her response. Earth Command, this is Commander Chun. Please inform the Secretary General that I accept the position of Director General of Interspecies Security. I will dedicate the remainder of my career to ensuring that freedom and peace remain the defining characteristics of our galaxy. As she sent the message, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The Vorthak Empire was gone, replaced by something infinitely better. Queen Zephyria's laughter at human weakness had become the catalyst for humanity's greatest triumph. Not the conquest of enemies, but the liberation of friends. And, in a memorial garden at the heart of the former flagship, the crystalline trees continued to grow, their branches reaching toward the stars where free peoples work together to build a future that no tyrant could ever destroy.